Hello, it's from Soft Serve, coming to you from the Land of Shadow. As surely you can tell, I've been playing a lot of the DLC. That's why you haven't seen a video for a little while. I've been kind of active on Twitter talking about it, but I wanted to make this video because there's been something that's been bugging me. I've been loving the DLC, like, a lot. Like, genuinely loving it, having the time of my life, new FromSoft content. It's also my first DLC that I'm experiencing with the community at the same time because I got into the Souls games with Dark Souls in like 2020, Dark Souls 1. And so I obviously missed all of the DLC releases because, of course, after that I ended up, Elden Ring came out in 2022. And prior to that, I had played all the games except for Sekiro. I played that after 2022. So yeah, this is my first DLC with the community, which has been great. And it's already had some of my favorite moments I've ever seen in a game, the most epic and the most beautiful scenery ever. Also, I'm in black and white because my camera sucks and I hated the color correction and the whatever. So I'm black and white. We're just going to roll with that. And it totally fits, right? Miyazaki said he approved, so. But there's one thing about the DLC I don't like. It's going to be spoiler free. Spoiler free. I'm not going to mention boss names or really the names of areas. It's more general concepts. So if you don't want to know anything and you haven't, had the chance to go into the DLC, then don't watch this video. But one issue I do have is what you may have heard already is the Scadutree fragment power system. And there's also another item for the powering up your spirit ashes. But I'm not really summoning, so I don't care as much about that. But the complaint would be the same, is that the Scadutree fragment is basically you go into the DLC and you need to find these fragments of the Scadu tree, assuming that's the tree. And you find that, and each one you find, you then each time need more and more to level up your power level, essentially. And I knew that going in. I had read about that. And in actuality, I don't really like it. I'm still really enjoying the DLC, but that part I don't like because before release, they had mentioned that the reason why they were doing it is to ensure that everyone had a difficult experience because they knew a lot of people had their characters that had been, massively leveled up and done so much. And now that we've actually experienced it, yeah, I don't like it. I've basically I've reached the final boss, and you basically have a maximum of 20 Scadu tree levels. And each one ups your damage and also your negation of damage from bosses and enemies. And so that's why people are getting wrecked when they kind of first enter the DLC or whatever, depending on who they end up facing. And so you find them, and some of them are easy to find. And, there's some people online who are like, oh, they're super easy to find. I don't know why you haven't found them. Maybe you're just not exploring well enough. It's like, no, luckily people on my channel here versus Twitter, you guys will know I spot a mesh hole in Dark Souls 1 from 6 miles away. So I don't have an issue noticing things. These fragments show up as normal item drops in Elden Ring in terms of their appearance from far away. Now where they're at, sometimes they're at statues of America but not always. And then, Mikola crosses that you've seen in the trailer and whatnot, they'll have a little fragment next to it. And yeah, I've picked up all of those. I've gone through every area, basically multiple times, consistently rerunning through areas, looking for them. And I'm 5 levels lower than the max. And, it's just been an issue where occasionally I'll hit a boss and it's just, you're 1 shot or 2 shot. And you're like, okay. And then you realize oh, I guess I got to go get more fragments. Which on the flip side, has actually made some things easier. But not in a good way. I did I've been talking with my brother because he's been playing through it as well. And the order that we did the bosses ended up kind of being different, right? And so I had an easier time with some bosses that now looking back, I kind of wish I had had a harder time. Like, I wish I would have done them in the order that I've seen other people do them. And that boss fight was more enjoyable for me. And I actually wish it was more difficult. And some people are like losing their minds, but like it was so epic. But for me, it was kind of trivialized because of the Scadutree fragment level I was at. And yeah, I don't like that it's being tied to that. That now everyone's having a different experience on every single boss because it depends on what your fragment level is. So that's another thing you have to mention of like, oh, okay, so I'm this level, my Scadutree fragment level was this, and that's going to color like your time with that boss so massively. More than anything else, it's going to be that fragment level, and it's basically like a I'm trying to think of the right word. Of course, when I'm recording, I can't think of the right word, but it's essentially like the top highest level difficulty modifier. And so that's the biggest thing now that you would mention when you're talking about a boss. And I guess I miss the olden days, which I say olden days, but really I'm a Souls, Souls ho since 2020. So it's not like it's been I'm not talking like 10 years ago, but like with Dark Souls 3, when I faced Slave Knight Gale as the final DLC boss, and that is kind of what I'm comparing the final boss of this DLC and just the bosses in general. I It was nice that in New Game, right, you can basically say, I face Slave Knight Gale. He is a set difficulty level in New Game. There was no big modifier for how difficult Slave Knight Gale was, based upon how much you explored the Ringed City, right? That's kind of the comparison. And we didn't have that. Now, of course, you could say, yeah, his difficulty is modified by your flask upgrades, right? Like how strong your flask is, how many flasks you have. Yes, but I guess I was fairly used to that. Dark Souls 2 and on, I was pretty used to that being kind of the case. So that was never a big deal. And so just adding a new one on top of that has made it more difficult to talk about difficulty in our experiences with bosses because it really depends on your, fragment level. And so going back to kind of the origins of why they came up with this system and why I understand why it exists, they essentially, it seems like they were trying to balance for characters that were level like 200 plus, 250, 300, right? Because those characters, if they went into the DLC on New Game, not New Game Plus, they wouldn't have as much of a challenge, right? My issue with that is that those levels are like that, hitting that level for your character in Elden Ring is not normal. That's over leveling, in my opinion, because I've done very thorough playthroughs in Elden Ring multiple times, and like even my first playthrough, I think was like 200 hours, and I ended up at like level, I'm gonna say like 150, 160. So, and it seems like that's mostly kind of where it ranges is in the 150 to 160, 70, 140, in that kind of range, right? Below 200 at least, I think, most of the time. And so balancing the game because of the people that hit level 250, 300, 350, that's crazy. Like, I feel like that was a choice to level up that high beyond what was normal. And traditionally, the Souls games have used New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus, etc., up until usually like plus 7, as if you want a challenge, and if you want to overlevel, and if you want to feel alive and truly punished and whatever, you can use New Game Plus, right? Also, I have some coffee, so I'm not gonna edit that out, by the way. That is a sponsorship for coffee, I guess. I don't know. Um, you would use New Game Plus, right? So I do wonder why they came up with this system when I feel like they could have just before release said, "Hey, so here's the recommended level for the for the DLC in New Game, right? we recommend like level 150, give or take, or a level range, maybe of 140 to 160 for like a really good experience that we think is tough and fair. And then if you want a big challenge, if you're a character that's over like 200, 250, 300, we recommend New Game Plus. Had they said that, then if you want the big challenge, just go into New Game Plus, and hopefully you would have enough time to do that. And there you go. We don't need the fragment system. Like, that's what I'm just like. I think the fragment system is punishing the normal level people. That I don't think we should have to have this thing where I have to go find an item throughout the world, normally exploring, mind you. And then I didn't find enough of them, apparently, and now things are way more difficult. And I know there's going to be people out there that are like, yeah, but it's incentivizing you to explore. Yes, but I understand that, like, for me personally, that's a bit of a failure of the game if you need to incentivize it by hiding an item that people need to go find. Your world should be beautiful enough and fun enough and intriguing enough to explore on its own without that. And I would say this world is. It's cool enough. There's bosses and weapons and, like, you didn't need the fragment system for me to go explore, which I know the response. I know people are typing it right now. They're saying, well, then what are you bitching about? It's already cool enough so you would explore anyway and find the fragments. My point is, I haven't found the fragments. And I genuinely, like, you guys know me. I've played an absolute fuckload of these games consistently all the time. I live in them. I think I'm a pretty good marker. You know, maybe that's my ego. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm great, but like when it comes to seeing things and noticing things and finding obscure shit, I'm pretty good at it. And I haven't been able to do it in the DLC that well. I finally resorted to just looking up guides because I've been roaming around on Torrent, roaming around the areas, and they're beautiful, but I've already fought the enemies in them, and I've fought the bosses, and I've found some cool things, yes, but I just simply haven't found enough of the fragments to where I don't want to pull my hair out on some of these bosses. That's kind of my issue. I don't think that's fun for me, personally. I want the freedom to explore the world and explore it as I normally do all of these games. And I've never had this issue before. Like in the base Elden Ring, I never had an issue with golden seeds, really. I was like, oh, okay, I got enough. And yeah, maybe I didn't have the max on enough of the bosses, like, but that was fine. It didn't alter my experience that much. Missing one or two flasks off the maximum, not a huge thing. That's like, okay, so I just take a little bit less hits, and yes, I can go find them if I want, but it's not going to massively alter my experience playing the game, right? And that's the same for like the sacred tears, right? I also didn't really have a problem finding those. And that's because I think of how they're always like in churches, right? And it only takes one and it powers up your flask, right? Where the golden seeds are, you needed multiple and more each time. But I found them just kind of naturally as I was going through the world. And sacred tears were specifically, I think, designed quite well because they were always in churches and you could look on the map once you had gotten the map fragment and you could actually look. The churches, you could sort of parse on the map and go, oh, okay, I see something that kind of looks like a church or ruins of a church, and then, you know, and not always was it a sacred tear, but like that's where they would be. And so the fragments are like that, but they function like the golden seed in that you need more and more of them to keep leveling up your Scadutree fragment level. But they're also not in easily decipherable places other than the Mikola crosses, which you can't see on the map. You then see on the little maps that they give you that then show a tiny little portion, and you go, okay, I see them on that. Let me go then close that, open the big map. The Mikola cross situation I'm fine with. Like, I think if they had been there and I had to look at the smaller maps and then go back to the bigger map and then figure out how to get there, and that's how I get all my fragments, I think I would have been totally cool with that. It's like a treasure hunt or an Easter egg hunt kind of thing. Pretty cool. I'd be fine with that. The problem is, I've been doing that and I don't have enough, and I'm like 5 levels off the maximum fragment level, and it's super fucking noticeable. I'm getting absolutely demolished, and not in a fun way. It's like 1 or 2 hits and you're dead. And it kind of reminds me of one criticism I have of the Bloodborne DLC, which was Lawrence. I always thought Lawrence did too much damage with certain hits, where it would be like 1 or 2 shots, you're dead, you're gone, done. And I that's a personal preference thing. I've never really enjoyed that type of difficulty. I've always enjoyed more where you have to really learn the move set, and it's sort of like a dance, right? And Slave Knight Gale, I think, is the perfect example of that. He's still my favorite Souls boss ever, because the everything is a 10 out of 10 for that. But specifically, I find it very fun fighting him. And I know that's difficult to do with difficulty, making difficulty fun. But with Slave Knight Gale, the fight and how he moves and understanding the telegraphs and the roll timings, and I'm not finding that as much with these DLC bosses, with massive AoEs, knockdowns, which is kind of like their new thing they seemingly have put into a ton of bosses in this DLC, of not constantly knocking your character down, and then you have that slow, I gotta get up again. And also the camera like 360s in some of these boss fights, where you're constantly disoriented of like, oh my god, whoa, oh my god, Jesus Christ, roll, oh my god. And it's way more than in their prior efforts. But Slave Knight Gale is sort of my example of that. And that's what I really love. Everything about that boss fight for me is perfect. And the fragment level, I can't imagine if that had been in DS3 and I would have had to find these obscure fragments just to alter my boss experience, you know? So those are sort of my random thoughts on it. I don't like it. It's essentially the giant soul mechanic from Dark Souls 2 with Vendrick, and how basically you couldn't do much damage to him, and he had 5 bajillion health if you didn't get the giant souls. So the more giant souls you got, it meant you could actually do more damage to him. Which, okay, I never liked that, and still never have to this day. I just don't think that's a fun idea. To at least there, you went into like giant memories, and they were marked with, as you had gone through the game, you're like, oh yeah, that's where that one giant is. It's that, and you go into the memory. And so I liked, even there, you had a very clear idea of where they were. And they're also, you didn't need to get a ton of them. I think it was like 7, 8, and it was just making the boss fight easier. Of course, it was a boss fight you didn't even really need to do. Spoilers for DS2. You could have kept them alive, I think, unless I'm wrong on that. But it's like that mechanic cranked up to like 50. And I think that's sort of the other issue I'm having, because I'm loving the DLC. If you've listened to this, you're probably like, this guy fucking hates the DLC. No, I love it, and it's some of the most beautiful shit I've ever seen, and I've had so many great experiences, and it's so much fun. But it's hard not to notice some of these that I haven't been enjoying as much. And so the map is another issue, which actually ties in directly to the fragment system, in that my spatial awareness in this DLC has been at an all-time low, with how vertical that it is and like packed full of stuff. I'm constantly seeing other areas that obviously has shit in it. And then I go, okay, well, I want to get there. And so I'm looking around, roaming, looking over the cliff side, seeing that there's like things I can hop down, and sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. And, I'm just constantly roaming, and like, oh, maybe it's a cave that like goes under and then like connects to it. And I'm really trying to access my soul's brain. And most of the time I'm just fucking lost. I'm just lost. I don't know where the fuck I am. And I'm looking at the map and I'm like, okay. The knowing what's higher than what's lower than what's medium, what's at any given point, I've honestly found it pretty difficult, and way more than the base game. I feel like the base game had its very like distinct areas, and within those areas, I understood the map, and more so of like what the levels like Liurnia, I could generally parse pretty easily of like, okay, what was the higher elevation regions, what were the lower, and I could kind of make my way through that. And all the different areas had different, I don't know, they had different like visual language, I think, for what they were trying to show. And here with the Realm of Shadow, I'm just pretty consistently lost and not knowing what level I'm on at any given point, because it's just one map. There's not like, you know, kind of like in the base game where you could hit the thumbstick to like go down to like the underground, and here it's just, here it is. And on top of that, an issue I've had is that when I haven't been able to figure out how to get to a certain area, when I've eventually I've given up, because I've been like, dude, I have no idea from what area, what place I'm supposed to go to get to someplace. And every single time I've ended up looking up how to get to a certain area, I went, well, I never would have found that. Like, that is a bit annoying to me. Like, I love that they hide things, and normally that wouldn't be an issue if I didn't have to get a certain number of fragments that's forcing me to go and find these super hidden areas. I'd rather find hidden areas because I bumble into them and I go, oh shit, that's so cool. But now it's way later in the game, and it's basically a homework assignment I'm doing because I need those fragments, or otherwise I'm going to pull my fucking hair out. I think that's the confluence of events that's leading to me not enjoying it as much. And so there was one where it was one fucking ladder off the side of a fucking area in a giant castle that everything is dark. There's no way I would have noticed that ladder. So you go down that ladder, and then there's like a fucking illusory wall inside of there, which then goes to this, and then there's multiple ways there. And I'm like, bro, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, that to me, it's a personal preference thing, I guess. I just don't find that terribly fun. So the fragment system, alongside the map being hard for me personally to parse, where I didn't have as much of an issue at all, really, with the base game, and that together is making the fragment system more annoying. But I also get that, like, if the fragments were easy to find, super easy to find, well, then what would be the fucking point? Just don't have them. If they're super easy to find and all I'm doing is just picking them up, well, then why would we have it? So it's reminding me of their other DLC experiences. And, like, those worked fine without a specific power-up system, right? Like, there's the Bloodborne DLC, and there's certain level ranges that you can go to do it, but you can do it earlier whenever you get the Blood Drunk Hunter eye or whatever. I guess I'm like, what was wrong about that? Like, I guess why did we need to upend that? And so, because the Bloodborne DLC, if you want like a super challenge, just do it on New Game Plus, and it's kind of crazy. Like, the level requirement's like fucking double. It's insane. And so if you've over leveled, just do that. I admit you have to play through the game again, and that does suck. And so I do wonder if that was kind of like the biggest reasoning behind this, was more so that Elden Ring is their longest game ever by quite a bit. And so they didn't want to have to tell players, hey, if you've leveled up this far, too far, not too far, but like, we consider like that's not the normal max level range. If you've done that, then you'll need to play the game again and do New Game Plus. I can see why they wouldn't want to do that, right? Because that players would be like, oh, fuck me, you mean I got to go through all that again? Because it is a lot. The base Elden Ring experience is so massive. So maybe that was the main thing, but I think it's had unintended consequences of trying to cater to the people that are level fucking 250, 300, 350, 400, whatever. And I think it's punishing the regular Souls players, where I just want to go in and it's like a set difficulty level. This also kind of stretches into my larger thoughts and preference for the older FromSoft experiences like Bloodborne and Dark Souls 1 and even Dark Souls 3 and all that, where it's wide linear, right? So it's not open world. But what I like about that is I'm exploring, but I don't really ever have that feeling of just being truly fucking lost. And it's kind of freeing because I can just enjoy the theme park that they've created for me and the dangers that are there and the loot and the hidden things that they will put there and the shortcuts. And so I really enjoy that experience. And I think there's the reason why that's working better for me is that they can control more so when I reach certain bosses, right? And you can create a more linear increase in difficulty because of that, because it's more controlled. So you can sort of learn mechanics and like, oh, okay, so now this boss is going to add this one and they're going to open, now they'll do knockdowns, but this one will add in this. And then it can sort of culminate in like the final boss or even up until the final boss of like, here's all the mechanics you need to learn. And I feel like Sekiro was really good for that because by the end of it, you needed to learn everything and then apply everything you've learned. And Elden Ring, because of the open world nature, it's sort of like, because I've noticed that in the DLC, I've been doing it in a different order than a lot of other people. And so all of our experiences have been different or altered because of that. And I'm like, shit, I went there first. There was a thing, once again, no spoilers. I had killed, a big boss or something. And it was after that they were like, oh, by the way, you got to go over here and do this thing and head that way. I had already done all of that. I had done that area. I had killed that boss. And the game, that was one of the times where it was basically telling me like, oh yeah, so normally you would have done this and then done that. Now, oddly, the other stuff I had done, I found vastly easier, despite that being the next step in progression, right? Weird. So I am preferring the more linear design, and I know I'll be in the minority on that. I absolutely will be in the minority because of how popular Elden Ring is. And I think that's totally cool because I'm still having a great time, but it is reminding me of why I like their more tailored experiences that are smaller like that, because they can really guide the player more. And it's less about ultimate freedom, right? And I think that's the other thing that kind of goes into that is that those games didn't have a map, right? And I know there's been people that have been like, oh man, I really wish they had a map. I'm glad they don't have a map because I feel like it forced the designers to just obsess over how the player could go and where they could go and the order of that. And so you didn't need a map. And that was always the beauty, I think, is that I would always get this muscle memory for the areas because I didn't have a map. And so I was just able to sort of understand the flow of it. And in Elden Ring, that's just completely thrown out by the open world methodology. And the DLC map, I can't seem to understand it. Like, gun to my head right now, I couldn't name most of the areas. I have no idea. And then in my head, I go, fuck, I don't know how they're ordered. I don't know where things are. And that's coming from someone that's played like 1,500 hours of Dark Souls 1, and Dark Souls 2 is like 500-600 hours, and Dark Souls 3 is hundreds of hours. And so I've played a fuckload of these games, and I have to admit, this is the first time I've really experienced these kind of things. So that's why I'm more wanting to talk about it, because it's sort of a first-time experience where I'm struggling a little bit more than I normally do, and that's okay for FromSoft to come up with new things that make me struggle, but I have to say this is a personal preference thing where I'm not enjoying this element of the struggle, if that makes sense. Like, these aren't, like the riding around on torrent. I was saying this on Twitter. If you follow my Twitter feed, you may have seen a lot of my bitching. Most of it, obviously, of what I've said about the DLC is just positive, and I love it, and there's so much sick, awesome shit, and it's so much content for $40, and it's fucking awesome. But I've also mention that all of the time that I've been riding around on Torrent, going back through areas multiple times, looking for things, looking for hidden ladders, looking for things I may have missed, and like the little purple item drop thing for the fragments, if I could cut out all of that, I would. I like the legacy dungeon stuff, which is kind of like your more linear classic stuff. If I could cut out all the in-between of time I've spent, tens, I mean, in this DLC, I've played at least 20 hours or more. It's kind of been a blur, but I'd say at least 25%, 30, 40% has been kind of just roaming around on Torrent, not really seeing a lot in certain areas. There's been like some really barren areas also that it's kind of weird. Like there's this giant fucking area and I went to it and I got like one thing and I roamed around it multiple times and multiple times and multiple times just to make sure, am I missing something? And it's like, no, it's just one item, I guess, which, okay. I mean, like, there doesn't need to be a ton, but it also is like, okay, there's a big chunk of the map. There's not a lot here. And one other thing I find interesting while I'm here, I'm just going to rant a lot, is one thing I found really odd that I haven't really seen anyone talk about is the loot, like the just regular item drops from enemies, items that are in areas. It kind of seems like I had run an item randomizer because these items are just all over the place. Like there's a somber smithing stone 1, but then like 3 feet over that way, there's like a somber smithing stone 8. And then there's a fucking mushroom, and then there's a bomb, and then there's I haven't really quite seen the rhyme or reason. I'm assuming they're just dumping all kinds of crafting materials at you. And it's unlike other DLCs I'm used to with them, where it's usually very focused, and the loot that you're getting is based upon when they thought you would enter the DLC, right? So like in Bloodborne, you would get bloodstone chunks or whatever, or twin bloodstone shards and then bloodstone chunks, because that made sense, and that's probably what you would have needed at that time. And I feel like all the games had sort of done that with the loot that you were getting in the DLC. And here it seems like they were just like, we're going to give all kinds of loot everywhere for different areas. And so like that also makes it difficult to parse progression, because I'm like, wait, is this a later area? Is this not a later area? Maybe it doesn't matter, I guess. Everything is everything. And so even the item drops, I can't really use that as any sort of gauge anymore. And so that's been kind of strange, because I don't know, it's like an Ice Cream Thursday thing. It's just, I have no idea what to expect. And I guess that's good, but it's also, most of it I haven't really needed. Like a lot of the loot I just don't fucking need, and it's just kind of clogging up my inventory, which now that we have the most recent items and like the little check mark next to it, or exclamation point, that's great. Like that's great quality of life stuff, but it does seem like a lot of the loot I'm just, okay. And then also there was a weird occurrence where I picked up like, I don't even know what it really was, but let's just say it was like a lightning negation talisman. And unlike prior FromSoft games and experiences, it had nothing to do with the area I was in, unless I missed something. But like in the whole area, nothing needed lightning negation or more lightning negation. And I guess that's fine that it doesn't. I guess I'm just used to that being the general principles. If you find that the game's telling you, this might help you in the near future or something. And maybe it's okay that like it's for a boss that's like 6 miles that way and 30 hours later, like, okay, I guess. I don't know. It's just been an odd loot experience, unlike anything I've experienced in the games thus far. And I really haven't seen anyone talk about it. But those are my random DLC spoiler-free thoughts, just broad concepts. How are you finding the DLC? Where are you at? If you could be very general about it, I'd prefer if there's no spoilers in the comments or anything for other people. So if you could just casually mention how you're finding the DLC, or if you haven't jumped in yet, when will you jump in? And what's your like overall thoughts of the DLC and the different systems? Because overall, I love it. obviously, I'm a hoe for FromSoft. I'm loving this. The music, some of the boss fights are the sickest shit I've ever seen, and the moves and the visuals are blowing my fucking balls off, and like, so there's so much here to love, and I do. But I also was like, some things are sort of chafing at me. Is that they're grinding my gears a little bit, and it does remind. I think my overall thoughts are sort of like, this is why I'm less likely to replay Elden Ring versus the other games. That's been my experience since I got into them. I haven't been drawn as much to replay Elden Ring because of how massive it is, because it's mostly hinged on exploration. And the second time you're exploring, this doesn't really hit that well. That's kind of the double-edged sword, right, of open world. Is like, oh man, the first time can be really cool, but the second time is just kind of, okay, it's just way less special. And I feel like the fragment system has only heightened that, but it's heightened that in the first playthrough. It's kind of made it less special to me, where I need to re-go through areas to, look past rocks and look in bushes and whatever. I'm exaggerating there, to find these fragments. Otherwise, I'm going to hate my life. And it makes the fights less fun for me. So there's my bitching done. I've got it out into the world. And yeah, let me know what you think. And I'll see you in the next video, which should be a Dark Souls 1 video about a cutscene and a bug I found that existed in the 2011 game. And it's very funny, and it's crazy I didn't notice it earlier. But yeah, look out for that. Also, this is my face. I know I don't know if I mentioned it 100%, but yes, I normally am not in video, so this is what I look like. I am in monochrome all the time in real life. I know you didn't know that, because you don't see me all the time, but this is just how I look. I'm in a big color world. It's crazy. I get a lot of comments about it in real life. But no big deal. Don't worry about it. I'll see you next time.